Here are the top mistakes that people are making on the carnivore diet. The first one is not being ready for the sugar and carbohydrate withdrawal symptoms. They can be extremely severe. As a matter of fact, my most watched video on this channel has to do with the carnivore adaptation symptoms, and a lot of those symptoms really are just sugar withdrawal symptoms. So most people will quit at this stage, but it shouldn't really last more than 10 to 14 days of feeling a little bit miserable. I will link this other carnivore adaptation symptoms at the end of this YouTube video so that you can check it out as well, because it can really help you hang in there until you can reap the full benefits of the carnivore lifestyle. Another mistake is not easing your way into carnivore. Not everybody finds success by going from eating a standard American diet or even any other kind of diet into carnivore. I personally eased my way into carnivore. So I did a ketogenic phase for a while until I managed to do carnivore. And so you want to know yourself and see if this is a much more realistic and easier and not as painful way to be able to transition to the zero carb, but much healthier lifestyle. Another mistake is not being prepared for the meat aversion phase. A lot of people might do great on carnivore for a while, but then they will hit a wall where they just cannot look at another steak or burger patty or anything having to do with the carnivore lifestyle. Just understand that this is a common thing and it will pass, but you have to push through for a few days until you can regain that passion for sticking to a healthier lifestyle. Another mistake is not having variety in your diet. So, if you don't need to do a lion diet where you're only eating red meat or lamb, just remember that there are so many other foods that you can have on a carnivore diet, right? You can have salmon, you can have eggs, you can have cheeses, butter, cream. Dr. Robert Kills has a famous carnivore ice cream, and you don't have to add sweetener to it. And I highly recommend that you check it out and get used to doing that. Brown butter bites is another carnivore dessert or treat that has no sugar in it, but it tastes like toffee candy that can really help you stay on track. Another mistake is that sometimes you feel like this is the diet that you have to follow for the rest of your life. And sure, you can do that if you choose to, but sometimes people have to go through this phase to get some healing and then they can go back and widen the variety in their diet. And so what I find is sometimes if you go into the carnivore diet and you start catastrophizing and thinking that you will have to eat this way for the rest of your life, and just the thought of thinking that that's the only food that you can ever eat might make you feel very depressed, just know that you don't have to think that way, because we don't know if this is the way that you're supposed to eat for the rest of your life. You know, nutrition as a science is very recent. We're still discovering a lot of things. My instinct tells me that it's probably the healthiest, most optimal human diet, but we don't know that for sure. And even if it turns out to be the healthiest diet in the world, you don't necessarily have to stick to it for the rest of your life. You might just need to do it for a period of time until you find some healing, and then you might be able to widen your diet into more healthy, whole foods, other variety of foods that can really make this lifestyle enjoyable. Another mistake is forcing yourself to eat organ meats. I, to this day, still don't eat organ meats. I just take desiccated or freeze-dried organ supplements. I use the ones from Ancestral Supplements, and you can definitely use my code to get 10% off. It's Dr.Sarah10. I will link it below, and you go to ancestralsupplements.com and you can use that code, or you can choose really, I mean, there are a lot of supplements. Heart and Soil is another brand. Um, so there are a lot of organ supplement companies available that you can use to make sure that you are getting all of the nutrients in the biologically active form and the proper proportion to one another, and you don't have to force yourself to eat organ meats. Another mistake is the all or nothing approach. So you're either doing a perfect carnivore or you are going on an all out binge. And so having that mindset has really done so much more harm, I think, to people than it has helped. If one day you go off the meal plan, it does not mean that all the healing was wasted. It does not mean that every single thing you learned along that journey meant nothing. And one meal is not going to reverse weeks and months of perfect adherence to the carnivore diet. So just get back on track. It's fine. You're not going to die from one terrible meal, even if you go off meal plan for 2 days, right? It's just, if it becomes a pattern, then we have an issue, right? But 1 or 2 days like that, it's not the end of the world. And don't look at it as a failure that is going to really completely just push you back to your previous eating habits. Another common mistake is not eating enough fatty meat. You don't want to eat lean meats for too long, because if you eat lean, super lean meats for more than 2 weeks, you really have a great risk of developing rabid starvation, where you start getting very serious health effects like diarrhea, fatigue. You can land in the ER and it can be fatal. And so your body needs good fats, good animal fats. And so do not be afraid to eat the fattiest cuts of meat that you can get your hands on. Another mistake that's so common that I specifically see in a lot of the clients that come to me for help is that people are eating sometimes way too much fat when their goal is weight loss. And a lot of health experts and influencers are pushing this narrative that, calories don't matter, eat all the butter, it does not matter. And it's just not true. And I know a lot of you are nodding your heads right now because you probably went through the priming protocol where you're eating all of the foods, all of the fats, all of the butter. And, or maybe it's not the priming protocol. Maybe you just stumbled across some carnivore content and it was encouraging you to eat a lot more fat, and you started just eating more of that and you started gaining weight. Yes, calories still matter. Yes, you will gain weight if the amount of calories you're ingesting are greater than the amount of calories that you are burning. It is not true that it's only when you eat carbohydrates that you gain weight. It is factually untrue, and I'm sure a lot of you are probably going through this right now. So, if you want to eat more fat, which I definitely recommend, you also want to make sure you're burning all this fat so that you are not gaining weight. And so that a lot of you that are watching probably have a goal of losing weight. And so, if you want to be able to do that, eat more fat, eat more meat, then you also want to burn it off and burn more of it so that you can also reap the benefits of weight loss on the carnivore diet. Another mistake is thinking that only organic and expensive, the most expensive meat you can get your hands on is good, healthy food. And it's just not true. Of course, I would love it if we can all get our hands on the highest quality meat, but it's also not realistic. And I know a lot of people have this obstacle, and which that's why they continue to eat the cheap carbohydrates and continue to develop the ill effects of that kind of diet, and developing overweight and obesity and type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's disease and acne and psoriasis and all that stuff. And so even the lowest quality meat, the conventionally raised meat that you can just go from and get from Publix, which is a grocery store here in Florida, or from Walmart, that is still going to reverse so many conditions. You're going to lose weight, you're going to feel better, you're going to reverse your type 2 diabetes. And you don't need to be paralyzed by this need for perfection all the time. Eventually, as your finances get better, that would be fantastic to get highest quality meat. But right now, if you're in a position where you just simply cannot afford it, I don't want you to miss out on the benefits of the carnivore diet. I don't want you to miss out on the complete elimination of cravings, on feeling great, reversing your chronic health conditions just because you feel like you cannot afford this kind of meat. Another mistake is not consuming enough electrolytes and not putting enough salt on your meals. When we go carnivore, we're not consuming any carbohydrates, which means very little insulin is being produced by our pancreas. So if we're not releasing enough insulin like we used to in the past, we're no longer retaining electrolytes to the same extent that we used to retain them in the past. And so there's an adaptation period as well, where it is even more critical that you supplement with more sodium, with more electrolytes. I went through that phase when I did ketogenic dieting, and so I was able to adapt to this low insulin state. And so it was an easier transition for me from keto to carnivore. But if you're going straight into carnivore, you're going to have an even more abrupt transition. And so in order to minimize the ill effects of that adaptation phase, in order for you to not feel really fatigued and just having terrible mood and maybe heart palpitations and all that kind of stuff, make sure you're putting enough salt on your food. I recommend Redmond's real salt or Himalayan pink salt because these they're very similar in that they come from very clean sources that do not have microplastics in them. It's just really the geography that's the difference between why we call it Redmond's real salt or Himalayan pink salt. And also remember that our ancestors used to drink spring mineral water. They would even drink blood sometimes when they would feel dizzy. And so they already knew how critically important electrolytes are. If we look at animals in the wild, they will travel really long distances to reach a salt lick so that they could lick the rocks that are rich in sodium and electrolytes. And so this is an innate need in all species, and we should not be afraid of the sodium, of the salt, of the electrolytes, because they were never the problem. It was really the carbohydrates and the insulin that is released in response to that was always the real root cause of all of these diseases that we're struggling with, like overweight and diabetes. Another issue that I find is particularly problematic for people who have type 2 diabetes or prediabetes, who have serious conditions that they want to reverse, is that they're getting all of these electrolyte packets from major brands, and sometimes they might have maltodextrin in them, whether it's stated on the ingredient list or if it's hidden under the term natural flavor. If it's got maltodextrin, this is a form of sugar that raises your insulin above and beyond anything else. And so that can really slow down your progress tremendously. So I recommend getting just pickle juice or get the electrolyte packets that are unflavored, because usually it's the flavored ones that tend to have the maltodextrin in them. Another common mistake is not consuming enough omega-3 fats. So make sure you have, again, variety if you can. If you're not following a lion diet for a period of time, then make sure you have things like salmon, fish roe or caviar, cod liver oil, butter, egg yolks. All those things are going to give you omega 3s that is an essential type of fat, and that is going to lower inflammation tremendously in your body. Another mistake is not supplementing with organ supplements or not eating organ meats. I already mentioned that I don't like organ meats, and I don't know if that will change. Maybe the palate does eventually adjust. I'm not training it to adjust. So it's really up to you if you want to train your palate to adjust to the taste of organ meats, or again, just go back to the organ supplements that I mentioned before. Now, if you want to eat it in real food, you can get it in ways like pate or liverwurst. If we go back to our ancestors, it was revealed that some of the earliest stone tools that our ancestors used were rocks to crush the skulls of the animals and eat the brain, which is super high in omega-3. So bone marrow as well, we would crush the bone marrow. We would crush the bones to extract the bone marrow and get all of these nutrients from them. So I do believe that just to be on the safe side and to prevent any nutrient deficiencies, including organ meats in some way or form, whether it's from real food or from supplementation, is important. Another mistake that I find is not consuming enough collagen. So we've been trained and brainwashed into thinking that the skin of chicken is not good for us, all the saturated fat is not great. And now we know that we need that collagen. So when you're consuming a rotisserie chicken or getting chicken wings or chicken drumsticks, I love the skin. Make sure you consume the skin. That's where you get the collagen. You can do bone broth as well. You can do the eggs between the shell and the white of the egg. You have a layer of collagen. The gristle in beef is also a form or a source of collagen. Pork ribs, all that kind of stuff. Don't shy away from that. We need more of it on a carnivore diet, or really on all diets. Another mistake is consuming too many processed meats like imitation seafood and sausages and hot dogs. All of those foods will either have high amounts of carbs and grains and starches, or seed oils and additives and preservatives. And so those are all things that are going to severely slow down any amount of healing and benefits you're going to get from the carnivore diet. Another mistake is not checking the ingredients of the sauces, marinades, rubs, and gravy that you might be adding to a carnivore diet. So if you're still using herbs and spices and things like that, pay attention. I remember one time I got into the habit of buying Mongolian beef spice because it tasted so good. And then I realized the reason it tasted so good is because it had so much sugar and so much starch. And yeah, of course, the meat is going to taste ridiculously good. And so the moment I realized that, I stopped. As a matter of fact, I no longer add any herbs nor spices. The only thing I add is just salt. And again, your palate will adjust. You will naturally learn to love and look forward to the real taste of unadulterated meats. Another mistake is dining out a lot in restaurants and not paying attention to what kind of oils they're using. Oftentimes they're using seed oils or they're adding sugars in the rubs that they use to cook the meats. There might be hidden grains and starches. So those are very common issues. And so especially if you are trying to reverse major chronic conditions, you want to be very careful if you have this habit of dining out regularly. Another mistake is giving up too soon. I often find that it takes at least 30 days to even sometimes 90 days, if not sometimes more, to see massive reversals of chronic health conditions, skin clearing, weight loss, all that kind of stuff. At the very least, you need to give it at least 30 days to 90 days to then make that determination whether a carnivore is for you or not. Another mistake is under eating. And so we're trained to limit our portions of red meat. We're trained to limit our portions of animal fats. And that is going to make you feel miserable if that's the only thing you're supposed to eat and you're not eating enough. I highly recommend, if you can work out, that you exercise and have a lot of movement so that you can increase your portion sizes as much as possible without also gaining body fat. Another mistake is thinking that carnivore is this cure-all. There are a lot of things like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or candida or SIRS and mold illness, or just having a low baseline dopamine level that because you've destroyed your dopamine centers from decades of addictions. Doing carnivore is going to give you a lot of healing, but it cannot cure every single thing under the sun. And so there are certain tests that we still have to do. There are certain things that we still need to do in a lot of cases to truly heal once and for all. For example, the low baseline dopamine issue. If you only do carnivore, it will still take up to 2 years for your brain's dopamine centers to come back to normal. And so you're going to live for 2 years in constant agony and pain and suffering because your brain just does not have the dopamine machinery for you to feel motivated, to have energy. And so you're going to be constantly craving foods. And so just going carnivore is not going to fix that unless you're willing to wait for 2 years. This is why rates of success is so low generally in sugar addiction, sobriety, in all kinds of addiction rehab programs, and also even in carnivore. I know we don't like to admit that, but it is the same rates of of sobriety or success on that. And that's because people are not treating the root cause, which is fixing the low baseline dopamine levels. And I do have a brain bundle, which is 3 guides. Every guide targets one of the main elements of my protocols to address the slow baseline dopamine. I've talked about this in other videos, so I'll try to post some other YouTube video that goes into detail about that. But if you cannot afford to hire a coach and work with us, then at the very least, check out some of those protocols on how to repair the brain damage that has occurred, all the dopamine destruction that has occurred from decades of food addiction, which I find is so common in pretty much almost anybody that comes to work with me. We usually have to do that first so that you're not suffering and in agony and just constantly craving foods and feeling miserable because you feel that you can't have them. So what you would get in the brain bundle, you have first the dopamine brain guide, which targets a specific exercise protocol because not all forms of exercise can do that. You have to train in a certain way in order to raise your baseline dopamine levels. That's all outlined in Dopamine Brain. The other major guide or major part of the protocol is called Monster Mindset. And in it, I have two types of visualizations, the energy versus training visualizations that I talk about that can also raise your baseline dopamine. And not only can they raise baseline dopamine, but they can increase dopamine production by 65% in a single session. And so it becomes its own beneficial addiction, a good addiction that you want to have. And in the long term, the more you do that, the more you can raise baseline dopamine level. This is something that I've had to come up with and refine because I started working with a lot of clients that had hundreds and hundreds of pounds to lose, and they just simply could not work out in the way that I wanted them to, as outlined in the Dopamine Brain Guide. And so the visualizations are very powerful, just as powerful as the exercise. Now, if you can do both, you're unstoppable. And then the third guide is a Monster Mind, the supplements, where I outline some supplements that can also raise your baseline dopamine levels. And if you want more focused attention and support, then definitely check us out for the one-on-one coaching with me on drsarahzaldivar.com/coaching. For the guides, it's drsarahzaldivar.com/shop. Thank you so much for watching. If this was helpful, make sure you let me know by giving this video a thumbs up, subscribing, and hitting that notification bell icon so YouTube alerts you every time I post a new video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.